The metallic tang of fear, acrid and unmistakable, coated Mark Sterling's tongue the moment he answered his phone. It wasn't the sterile operational alertness he felt before a counterterrorism raid, nor the simmering tension of a high-stakes surveillance. This was raw, visceral, a sucker punch to the gut that stole his breath and left him reeling. His sister's name, Chloe, echoed in the frantic silence of his mind, even before his brother-in-law, Tom, managed to choke it out, his voice a ragged ruin. "Mark, it's Chloe. She's gone. Gone." The word was a singularity, a black hole devouring all light, all reason, all hope. Chloe, 7 months pregnant, the very embodiment of gentle anticipation, the cherished keeper of his softest, most protective affections, was gone, vanished from their quiet tree-lined suburban street in the placid heart of a Tuesday afternoon. Tom was babbling a torrent of fractured words tumbling over each other. Erin's Chloe was supposed to be home, a brief stop back at their house for her, an empty house, her purse on the kitchen counter, the car still in the driveway. No note, nothing, just nothing. Mark's mind, meticulously trained by years in the FBI's crucible of counterterrorism to dissect chaos into actionable intelligence, began to whir a desperate engine, kicking into gear, even as his heart hammered a frantic, panicked rhythm against his ribs. He remembered Chloe's call just yesterday, her laughter bubbling, as she recounted her latest minor skirmish with Karen Henderson, their HOA president, over the precise shade of blue for the new mailbox. "Honestly, Mark," Chloe had said, half exasperated, half amused, "you'd think Mrs. Henderson was personally offended by periwinkle. She just has to control everything. Sometimes I think she gets a thrill out of making people jump." A throwaway comment, then now a tiny, irrelevant detail, snagging in the cogs of his racing thoughts. He cut through Tom's escalating panic with a veneer of calm he was nowhere near feeling. "Tom, listen to me. Focus. When did you last see her?" "Exactly. What was she wearing? Did she say anything? Anything at all about going anywhere unusual? Meeting anyone?" The mundane details, usually the comforting bedrock of a normal day, now felt like shards of broken glass underfoot. Chloe had been wearing a yellow maternity dress. Tom finally managed to recall her favorite, a splash of sunshine, that mirrored her disposition. She'd been humming, Tom remembered, excited about finally starting to paint the nursery that evening. Nothing unusual, nothing to hint at the yawning abyss that had just opened up beneath their feet. "I'm on my way," Mark said, his voice a flat line of forced, brittle control. He was already moving his keys snatched from the bowl by the door, his off-duty Glock being checked and holstered with an automaticity that was a stark, chilling contrast to the maelstrom raging inside him. This wasn't a case file. This was Chloe, his sister. The drive to Elm Street was a blur of mocking red lights and infuriatingly oblivious drivers, moving with a languid normalcy that grated on his raw nerves. Each delay was a fresh stab of anxiety. He dialed his unit chief, Martin Genlow, the explanation terse, the words, "Family emergency potential abduction, my sister Chloe," cutting through the usual protocols like a razor. Genlow, a man Mark respected, deeply understood the subtext immediately. Resources would be mobilized discreetly at first, but ready to escalate. He was an FBI agent, yes, a tool of the federal government, but in this terrifying moment, that identity was secondary. First, foremost, and always, he was a brother. The thought of Chloe vulnerable, heavily pregnant in the hands of someone unknown. He slammed the mental door on that image, the click almost audible in his mind. Focus, analyze, act, don't feel, not yet. He arrived at Tom and Chloe's normally welcoming yellow-doored house to find a scene of quiet domesticity violently, inexplicably interrupted. The faint, sweet scent of lemon cleaner, Chloe's preferred brand, still hung in the air, a ghostly testament to her recent presence. Her favorite floral apron, the one she wore for baking, was draped over a kitchen chair as if she'd just taken it off. On the gleaming stainless steel fridge, a sonogram picture, their first glimpse of the life growing within her, was held by a jaunty ladybug magnet. Mark's gaze, sharp and all-encompassing, swept the room, cataloging, searching for any discordant note, any tiny crack in the veneer of normalcy. Tom was a wreck, a ghost of the cheerful man Mark knew. He paced the length of the living room like a caged animal, his face pale, and drawn hands raking repeatedly through his already disheveled sandy hair. The police are on their way. He mumbled, his voice hoarse. Officer Ramirez, she said not to touch anything. Not that there's anything to touch. He gestured vaguely around the immaculate room. Mark nodded his eyes, missing nothing. The pristine state of the house was itself a clue. No sign of forced entry, no overt struggle. That could mean she knew her abductor, or that she was taken elsewhere, or a dozen other terrifying possibilities. He walked methodically through the downstairs. Living room, dining room, kitchen, half bath, then ascended the stairs, his movements economical, his senses heightened to an almost painful degree. The nursery painted as soft, gender-neutral sage. Green was half finished, a rocking chair draped with a knitted blanket in one corner, tiny whimsical animal decals waiting on the dresser. A wave of profound gut-wrenching sadness washed over him so potent it nearly buckled his knees. He suppressed it fiercely. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not now. The local police arrived. 2 uniformed officers, Ramirez and a younger, more stoic officer named Peterson. Their expressions were a practiced mixture of concern and professional assessment. Mark identified himself the weight of his FBI credentials, lending a new, unwelcome gravity to the situation. He relayed Tom's disjointed account, adding his own initial observations. No obvious signs of forced entry. She wouldn't just leave Tom as adamant, not without her phone, which is still on the kitchen counter, not without telling him, especially not now. The unspoken pregnant hung heavy and ominous in the sunlit room. Officer Ramirez, a woman with kind eyes but a firm demeanor, nodded. We'll start a neighborhood canvass immediately, Agent Sterling. Check for any doorbell cameras, anyone who saw anything. As the local PD began their preliminary investigation, their questions echoing in the suddenly too large house, Mark's phone buzzed. An unknown number. His blood ran cold, a premonition tightening his chest. He answered, his voice carefully neutral. No, it wasn't a call, a text. Is your sister important to you, Agent Sterling? We have her. Don't involve more police than absolutely necessary if you want to see her and the baby again. Instructions will follow. His breath hitched. Agent Sterling. They knew who he was. This wasn't random. This was targeted. The implications were horrifying, a cascade of worst-case scenarios. His work in counterterrorism, tracking faceless enemies across continents, had made him targets. Had one of those shadowy figures finally found a way to reach him, to pierce his carefully constructed defenses by striking at his family? The thought was a cold serpent coiling in his gut, its venom seeping into his resolve. He showed the text to Officer Ramirez and Detective Miller, a senior local officer who had just arrived, his face etched with the grim lines of too many bad days. Miller's face hardened perceptibly. This just escalated, significantly. He looked at Mark. They know who you are. That changes the game entirely. Mark nodded grimly, the cold serpent tightening its grip. It does. This isn't a standard missing persons. He was already coordinating with his FBI field office, Genlo's earlier quiet concern, now replaced with urgent, decisive action. A full-scale federal response was being initiated. The hostage rescue team, HRT, would be prepped and moved to a staging area. Surveillance units activated tech agents from the cyber division, ready to trace the number to dissect any digital crumb. The quiet suburban street, usually alive with the sounds of children playing and lawnmowers humming, was subtly, almost imperceptibly transforming. Unmarked cars began to appear, parking at discrete intervals. Men and women in civilian clothes, their alertness a palpable low hum, started to blend into the background, observing, assessing. A mobile command post, a nondescript RV, was being established a few blocks away, out of immediate sight, but close enough to coordinate. Mark found himself at the epicenter of this burgeoning operation, caught in a strange, disorienting duality of roles, the terrified, heart-sick brother and the seasoned federal agent trying to maintain professional detachment. Another text. His phone felt like a live grenade in his hand. We see the new arrivals, Agent Sterling. Not smart. You're making this harder for Chloe. And for yourself. Followed by a picture. Chloe. His beloved sister tied to a stark wooden chair, her eyes wide, with unadulterated terror, a crude gag knotted tightly across her mouth. Her pregnant belly was prominent beneath the yellow dress, a stark, brutal symbol of her profound vulnerability. Mark's vision tunneled, a red mist creeping at the edges. He felt a primal roar build in his chest, an overwhelming urge to find a hunt, to destroy whoever was doing this to her. He fought it down, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone, the screen cracking under the pressure. "They're watching," he said to Miller, his voice dangerously low, a growl barely restrained. "They have to be close, very close." The neighborhood. One of these smiling, concerned faces, offering sympathy, bringing casseroles, could be the enemy. The thought made his skin crawl with a cold, visceral revulsion. He scanned the faces of the onlookers, the neighbors who had gathered at a respectful distance, their expressions a disquieting mix of fear, morbid curiosity, and a certain unsettling excitement. Mrs. Henderson, Chloe's elderly neighbor, clutching her yappy poodle, her face a mask of distress. Young Mr. Abernathy from across the street, always tinkering with his car, now standing with a wrench still in hand, looking bewildered. And then, his eyes landed on Karen Henderson, the HOA president. She stood with her arms crossed, a look of intense, almost avid interest on her sharp-featured face. He'd had a few minor run-ins with her himself over the years, a dispute over a slightly overgrown hedge, another about the placement of his trash cans on collection day. Chloe had complained about her more often, about her petty tyrannies, her obsessive need for control over the minutiae of neighborhood life. He'd always dismissed her as a harmless, if irritating nuisance, a busybody with too much time on her hands. Now every familiar face was suspect, every past interaction re-examined through a lens of paranoia. Karen's gaze met his for a fleeting second, and he thought he saw a flicker of something unreadable there, before she quickly looked away, her expression morphing back into one of grave concern. The FBI tech team, led by a sharp young agent named Davies, was working frantically on the burner phone's location, but it was being routed through multiple spoofing layers, bouncing signals across the globe. Sophisticated, or someone who knew how to appear sophisticated with readily available tools. The demands hadn't come yet, just the psychological torture. They wanted him to stew. They wanted him to break. They wanted him to make a mistake. Hours crawled by, each minute, an eternity of gnawing anxiety. Tom, utterly broken, had finally been persuaded by Miller to accept a mild sedative from the paramedics who were on standby, and was now fitfully dozing on the sofa, his face etched with grief. Mark paced the caged tiger, liaising with Genlo and the rapidly expanding FBI team, going over every detail of Chloe's life, his own life, his caseload, searching for a connection, a motive beyond the obvious leverage against him. Had any of his recent counterterrorism cases involved direct threats to family? There were always background checks, implied risks, but direct credible threats were rare and always taken with utmost seriousness. None came to mind that fit this particular brand of insidious cruelty. Then came the call. Not a text. A voice electronically distorted, a synthesized robotic rasp, but with an underlying cadence, a peculiar rhythm that pricked at the edges of his memory. He couldn't quite place it, but it felt almost familiar. "Agent Sterling, enjoying the show we've arranged for you." Mark kept his voice even a Herculean effort to betray none of the violent storm raging within. "What do you want?" "Want. That's a very big word, Agent. Let's start with what you want. You want Chloe back, safe and sound. Her and the little parasite she's carrying." The cruelty was deliberate, calculated, designed to provoke, to shatter his composure. Mark gritted his teeth, the sound barely audible. "Yes." "Good. Because how you react to our requests will determine her future, and perhaps yours. We're testing you, Agent Sterling. Let's see how good you really are when the stakes are truly personal. Let's see if all that FBI training holds up when your own flesh and blood is on the line." Testing him. The phrase snagged in his mind. It felt off. Professional criminals, organized crime terrorists. They usually had clear, albeit abhorrent, objectives: money, political concessions, release of prisoners. This felt more like a game, a twisted, sadistic, intimately personal game. And the emphasis on his reaction? The first demand was simple, almost laughably, so if the context weren't so utterly dire. Transfer a small, bizarrely specific sum, 17,437, to an untraceable cryptocurrency account. A token of your willingness to cooperate, Agent Sterling, the distorted voice rasped. And a little something for our trouble so far. A processing fee, if you will. Now, Mark agreed immediately, the team already tracing, trying to find a weak link in the financial chain, though they all knew it was likely a dead end with crypto. The small, oddly specific amount, it was almost theatrical, as if chosen for effect, not for actual financial gain. While the transfer was being initiated by FBI financial analysts, another text arrived, adding another layer of torment. Chloe isn't feeling too well. The stress, a little dehydration setting in. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you let her get into this delicate condition, or before you called in your army. Attached was another photo, Chloe looking visibly paler, her hair matted with sweat, her eyes duller, the fear still there, but now overlaid with exhaustion. Mark's control stretched taut for hours, frayed dangerously. "Where is she?" he snarled into the phone when the distorted voice called back a few minutes later to confirm receipt of the funds. He could hear a faint, almost inaudible click on the line, like someone clearing their throat before speaking through the modulator. "Patience, Agent Sterling. All in good time. We're just getting started with our little evaluation." The line went dead. The sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the manicured lawns of Elm Street. Floodlights were being discreetly positioned by the FBI teams, bathing the area in an eerie artificial glow. The neighborhood was on lockdown, but the atmosphere was one of hushed, fearful vigilance, rather than overt siege. Mark hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, hadn't even sat down for more than a few minutes. He was running on pure adrenaline and a cold, hard fury that was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. He was reviewing Chloe's recent social media posts, her emails, her call logs, anything, everything. For the 100th time, his eyes burning when Davies, the young tech agent, approached him, his usual eager expression replaced by one of intense concentration. "Sir, we got a partial trace on the last call, the one you just took. It bounced through several international towers as expected, but the initial signal uplink was weak, very localized before it hit the main scrambler. Almost like it originated somewhere nearby and then was immediately pushed through a more sophisticated routing system. Nearby? How nearby?" Mark's head snapped up, his focus narrowing. "Within a mile, maybe less." The distortion on the voice is also, "Interesting, sir. It's a common software easily available online. Freeware even. Not high-end professional grade, not something a serious international group would typically rely on for this level of operation." Davies hesitated. "It's almost amateurish in that specific aspect. The rest is well masked, but the voice modulation itself is basic." A mile. They were close. And the voice modulation, it wasn't state-of-the-art. This wasn't feeling like a sophisticated international terrorist cell he'd tangled with in the past. The pieces were clicking, or rather misaligning from that initial assumption, forming a disturbing new pattern. The theatricality of the demands, the testing him, the oddly specific, almost petty sum of money, the focus on his reaction, the taunts that felt more personal than political. He thought of Karen Henderson again, her avid, almost predatory gaze earlier as she watched the FBI presence grow. She lived just 3 houses down. She knew Chloe had served with her on the disastrous Community Garden Committee last spring, a venture that had collapsed under the weight of Karen's micromanagement and insistence on organic-only, heritage seed-only planting, which no one else had the time or inclination for. She knew he was FBI. The whole neighborhood did a point of local gossip she'd undoubtedly relished and probably exaggerated in her retellings. She was the HOA president, a self-important woman who thrived on control and drama, on being the center of neighborhood attention. He remembered Chloe's frustrated sigh after one particularly contentious HOA meeting. "Karen just loves to make mountains out of molehills, Mark. She needs to be in charge to feel like she's directing some grand play." Could it be the idea was monstrous, almost too bizarre, too parochial to contemplate? A power play taken to an insane extreme. But with Chloe's life, her pregnancy hanging in the balance, it seemed impossible, yet. The peculiar cadence of that distorted voice. He tried to strip away the electronic rasp. Karen had a slightly nasal, slightly superior tone when she was delivering one of her HOA pronouncements, a distinct way of emphasizing certain words. Was it lurking beneath the digital disguise? He needed to be sure, or at least surer. He couldn't just barge in, accuse the HOA president based on a hunch and a faint memory of her voice. He needed a pretext, something innocuous. He remembered Karen's almost pathological obsession with HOA rules and neighborhood aesthetics. He walked out of Chloe's house into the cool evening air, the tension a physical crushing weight. He walked slowly down the street towards Karen's meticulously kept, overly landscaped home. He saw a light on in her living room, the curtains slightly ajar. He rang the doorbell. After a moment, she opened it, a look of mild surprise, quickly morphing into one of exaggerated, feigned concern. "Agent Sterling, Mark." "Oh, goodness, any news? This is just dreadful, simply dreadful. Poor dear Chloe. And the baby." Her voice was a little too high-pitched, her sympathy a little too effusive, her eyes a little too bright. "Karen," Mark said, his voice deliberately weary, playing the part of the distraught brother. "I was wondering if you saw anything earlier, anything at all, this afternoon. You're usually so observant of what goes on around here." He recalled how she'd once sent a sharply worded email to the entire HOA listserv about a car parked facing the wrong direction for more than an hour. Her eyes flickered, just for a nanosecond. "Oh, I was in and out, errands, the usual Tuesday runaround." She wrung her hands, a gesture that seemed a little too practiced. "I wish I could help. I've been praying for her for all of you. We all have." "We're looking at neighborhood security cameras, doorbell footage," Mark said, watching her face intently. "Did you happen to see Chloe leave today? Perhaps with someone, or any unfamiliar vehicles on the street around, say, 2 to 3 o'clock? Karen's face was a careful mask of thoughtful concern. "No, nothing out of the ordinary, I'm afraid. I told the other officers the same. I wish I had. This whole community is just beside itself with worry." She paused, then tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting to one of almost clinical interest. "You must be under terrible, terrible strain, Mark. First your sister such a shock, and then having to manage this whole enormous situation. It's a lot for one person to handle. Are you absolutely sure you're, reacting appropriately? Not overreacting. I mean, sometimes in these high-pressure scenarios, one's judgment can become clouded, reacting appropriately." The words, her specific emphasis on reacting, echoed the kidnapper's taunt. "Let's see how good you really are, how you react." Mark's blood turned to ice. It was her, he was almost certain, the way she emphasized reacting. The slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she gestured vaguely. The way her eyes had darted away for a split second when he mentioned security cameras. But it was still a hunch, a strong one, but not enough for an arrest, not enough to risk Chloe if he was wrong. He needed something concrete. "Thank you, Karen," he said, his voice carefully mild. "We appreciate everyone's cooperation." He turned as if to leave, then paused, feigning a sudden thought. "Actually, there is one small thing, if you don't mind. We're trying to map everyone's movements today just to eliminate possibilities. Your car, it's that dark blue sedan, right? The newer model." She looked flustered for a moment, her composure slipping. "Yes, that's right, a Volvo. Why?" "Just routine, trying to eliminate vehicles from any potential witness accounts of cars leaving the neighborhood. You said you were running errands. Where did you go roughly? What sort of times were you out?" Karen hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, her gaze darting past his shoulder towards the street. "Oh, let me see. The grocery store, then I had to pick up my dry cleaning. The usual spots. I was probably back by 3:30, I think. Yes, around then." Chloe had disappeared sometime between 2 and 3 p.m. "Right, thanks, Karen. You've been very helpful." Yet, he gave her a small, tired smile and walked away, his mind racing. Her hesitation, the timing she gave. It was thin, but it was something. He subtly signaled Davies, who was coordinating tech from the mobile command post. When he was out of Karen's direct line of sight, he spoke into his discreet comms unit. "Davies, I want a priority deep dive on Karen Henderson's digital footprint. Everything. Social media, any known associates, recent online purchases, especially software or electronics. And get a team on traffic cameras. I want to see if any cameras on routes to local grocery stores or dry cleaners picked up her dark blue Volvo between 2 and 3:30 today. Cross-reference with any cell tower pings from her known phone. Keep it very quiet for now. He returned to the command post, the converted RV, now humming with quiet, focused activity. The waiting was agony. He replayed the distorted voice from the kidnapper's call in his head over and over. The cadence. The slight upward inflection at the end of certain sentences. He'd heard Karen speak countless times at those interminable HOA meetings, her pronouncements on recycling bin etiquette, lawn maintenance standards, and the controversial proposal for synchronized Christmas decorations. Underneath the electronic distortion, was there a hint of her slightly nasal, slightly superior lecturing tone? He thought of the rejected community garden proposal, how personally affronted she had seemed when the residents, including Chloe, had politely declined to participate in her overly ambitious scheme. Had that festering resentment, combined with a desperate need for attention and control, curdled into something this monstrous? An hour later, an eternity in Mark's perception, Davies approached him, his face grim, holding a tablet. "Sir, we've got several significant hits on Karen Henderson." His voice was low, charged with urgency. "Talk to me, Davies." "Financials first. 3 days ago, she purchased voice distortion software online. Our audio techs have confirmed it's the exact same program, same version, used in the kidnapper's calls to you. Yesterday, she purchased a high-end burner phone and a multi-SIM international roaming package paid for in cash at an electronics store 20 miles out of town in a different county." Davies paused, swiping on the tablet. "And her car traffic cam footage from a license plate reader shows her dark blue Volvo driving away from the direction of our town's main shopping district at 2:15 p.m., heading eastbound on Millersville Road towards the old abandoned quarry. It's the only major landmark out that way. She re-entered town limits caught by another camera at 3:45 p.m. Her alibi about local errands between those times doesn't hold up at all." The abandoned quarry. It was isolated, overgrown, a known spot for illicit dumping and occasional teenage parties. A perfect, secluded place to hide someone. "And there's more, sir." Davies continued, his voice even lower now. "We cross-referenced her known email accounts and cloud storage with recent unusual online searches. In the last week, she's been looking up laws regarding false reporting of a crime penalties for creating a hoax. And far more disturbingly, multiple searches for effects of psychological stress on late-term pregnancy, inducing premature labor through distress, and how long can a pregnant woman be safely restrained?" Mark felt a cold, murderous rage solidify within him, a terrifying calm descending. This wasn't just a twisted prank by a lonely woman. This was calculated, deliberate cruelty. She was actively researching how to harm Chloe, or at least how to maximize her terror and leverage. She was deliberately tormenting Chloe, tormenting him, endangering his sister and his unborn niece or nephew. "Davies." Mark set his voice like chipped flint. "Get a tactical team ready. Silent approach protocol. I want eyes on that quarry specifically. Any outbuildings, any structures. Now, and get Judge Patterson on the line for me. I need an emergency warrant for Henderson's house and all property. Tell him it's exigent circumstances, life-threatening." Achi. The pieces were no longer just clicking. They were slamming into place with brutal force. Karen Henderson, the petty tyrant of Elm Street, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, with her desperate, pathetic need for importance, for drama, for control. She hadn't kidnapped Chloe for money or for any grand political motive. She'd done it to orchestrate a crisis, to insert herself into the center of a high-stakes drama, to see how he, FBI, Special Agent Mark Sterling, the man who likely represented everything she felt she wasn't, respected, authoritative, important, would react. To feel powerful, even if just for a fleeting, delusional moment. The sheer narcissistic audacity of it, the profound sociopathic disregard for human suffering was breathtaking. He thought of Chloe, terrified alone, possibly at that desolate quarry, her health and the baby's health deliberately, sadistically endangered by this monstrous woman. His gentle sister, who wouldn't hurt a fly, who had probably tried to be kind to Karen, even as Karen was planning this horror, now being used as a disposable prop in Karen's sick, twisted psychodrama. The warrant came through with record speed, Judge Patterson understanding the dire urgency. Mark, along with Detective Miller and a small, heavily armed FBI tactical team, approached Karen's meticulously kept house. The lights were still on. He could see her silhouette moving inside, occasionally peering through the edge of her curtains. This time, there would be no pretense of a neighborly chat. He hammered on the door, his fist striking the wood with a force that reverberated through the quiet street. "Karen Henderson, this is the FBI, open the door." Silence for a beat, then frantic scurrying movement from within. "FBI, open the door now, or we will force entry," Miller bellowed, his voice authoritative. The door creaked open a few inches. Karen Henderson stood there, her face chalky white, her eyes wide, with a dawning, terrified realization. The carefully constructed mask of feigned concern was gone, shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated fear. "Agent Sterling, Detective Miller, what is the meaning of this?" she stammered, trying to muster her usual indignant, imperious tone, but it came out as a pathetic, trembling squeak. "Where is my sister, Karen?" Mark's voice was a low, lethal growl, all pretense of civility, stripped away, leaving only the raw fury of a brother pushed to the edge. "Your sister, I told you. I don't know anything. I've been here all day, worried sick, like everyone else." Her voice was rising, becoming shrill. "The voice distortion software, Karen, the burner phone, the trip to the quarry this afternoon, your lies about your errands, your internet searches about how to hurt a pregnant woman. It's over." Mark stepped forward, pushing the door fully open. The tactical team fanned out swiftly and silently behind him, securing the small house. Karen's composure completely shattered. Tears, whether of fear, frustration, or self-pity, welled in her eyes. It was just a prank. She shrieked, her voice cracking, devolving into a desperate wail. "A social experiment. I just wanted to see. I wanted to see what you'd do. You're always so calm, so in control, so superior. I just wanted to shake things up a bit, to show everyone I could orchestrate something big, something important." Her gaze darted wildly between Mark and Miller. "He dismissed my proposal for the HOA Community Initiative last year, laughed practically. Said it wasn't feasible. Who is he to decide what's feasible for our community?" Mark stared at her, momentarily speechless, at the sheer, unadulterated selfishness, the profound, horrifying lack of empathy, the petty, festering resentment that had metastasized into this nightmare. "Shake things up," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft, more menacing than any shout. "My 7 months pregnant sister is missing, terrified, possibly injured her life and her baby's life at risk. And you wanted to shake things up because I didn't greenlight your ridiculous plan for a synchronized dog walking schedule. She's fine, she's perfectly fine," Karen insisted, her voice rising hysterically, grasping at straws. "She's at the old groundskeeper's cottage by the quarry. I left her water some granola bars. She thinks it's a game, a surprise party for Tom that went a bit sideways. She doesn't know anything else." A game. Mark felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated fury shake him from head to toe. "She's tied to a chair, Karen. We've seen the pictures you sent. She's gagged. You researched how to cause her maximum distress." Karen flinched violently, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route, an ally, but found only hard, condemnatory stares from the assembled officers. That was just for effect, for the photos, to make it look real, so you'd react properly, so you'd take it seriously. She wasn't really uncomfortable for long. I loosened the gag after I took the pictures, mostly. Her defense was crumbling into a pathetic mess of self-justification. "The quarry now," Miller said, his voice firm and uncompromising as he produced handcuffs. "You're going to take us there, and you're going to hope for your sake that Agent Sterling's sister is exactly as fine as you claim." As Karen Henderson, now sobbing and protesting her innocence, claiming it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that she never meant any real harm, was led away in handcuffs. Mark was already on the radio, his voice tight with urgency, directing the other tactical team to converge on the groundskeeper's cottage at the abandoned quarry. He couldn't wait for the slow procession with Karen. He jumped into his own unmarked bureau vehicle, Miller, taking the passenger seat, and sped towards Millersville Road, his siren now activated, cutting a desperate swathe through the night. The old quarry road was rutted, dark, and treacherous. His headlights bounced erratically off overgrown trees and decaying fence posts. The groundskeeper's cottage, when they finally reached it, was a dilapidated single-story structure, barely visible through the dense, encroaching foliage, its windows dark and broken. As they pulled up, the other FBI tactical team was already converging weapons, ready moving with practiced lethal efficiency. FBI Chloe Sterling, if you are in there, make a sound. An agent with a bullhorn called out, the amplified voice booming in the eerie stillness. A faint sound from within. A muffled cry, weak but distinct. Mark didn't wait for orders or protocol. He kicked open the flimsy, rotting door. And there she was, Chloe, tied to a rickety wooden chair in the center of the squalid room, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and dawning incredulous hope as she saw him. The gag was still in place, but looser now, as if she'd been struggling against it for hours. The yellow dress was soiled, her hair tangled. Chloe. He rushed to her side, his tactical knife already out slicing through the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. He gently pulled the damp, dirty gag from her mouth. She gasped a raw, ragged sound, then started to sob uncontrollably, burying her face in his shoulder as he worked to free her completely. Mark. Oh, Mark. I was so scared. She said it was a game at first, some kind of elaborate surprise for Tom, but then she tied me up. She took pictures. She kept talking about how important this was, how everyone would finally see. I didn't know what to think. I thought I was going to die here. It's okay, Chloe, it's okay, I've got you. You're safe now, he murmured, holding her tight, his own relief, so profound, so overwhelming it was dizzying. He could feel her trembling violently. Paramedics, part of the convoy, were already rushing in, checking her vital signs, their voices calm and reassuring. She was severely dehydrated, deeply shaken, bruised from the ropes, but miraculously seemed physically unharmed otherwise. The baby, thank God, according to the initial field assessment, was also okay, its heartbeat strong on the portable monitor. As Chloe was being gently helped into a waiting ambulance wrapped in a thick blanket, her eyes still clinging to Mark's, with a desperate intensity, he turned to face the stark reality of what Karen Henderson had done. This wasn't just a prank gone wrong. This was a calculated, premeditated act of psychological terrorism, meticulously planned and executed. She had faked a kidnapping, issued demands, sent threatening messages and deeply disturbing pictures, all to elicit a specific reaction from him, to feel a perverse sense of power and control. She had terrorized his sister, his family, and entire community, and had triggered a massive, costly federal law enforcement response, all for her twisted, narcissistic entertainment and to settle some imagined slight. Back at Karen Henderson's house, the scene was one of methodical forensic investigation. Evidence bags were being filled. Her computer, her phones, the original packaging for the voice distortion software, a roughly written script she'd apparently drafted for the kidnapper's calls, complete with stage directions like pause for effect and sound menacing. It was all there, laid out on her pristine dining room table. The sheer premeditation, the chilling attention to detail in her cruel plan was horrifying. Neighbors, drawn by the continued commotion, peeked from behind their curtains, their earlier concern and sympathy now morphing into disbelief and a growing, palpable outrage, as whispers of Karen's direct, deliberate involvement began to spread like wildfire through the stunned community. Karen, sitting in the back of a locked police car, watched the activity around her house, her face a mask of bewildered indignation, not remorse. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she kept muttering to the impassive officer in the front seat. It was just a joke, a bit of fun to liven things up. People are just too sensitive these days. He shouldn't have dismissed me. Gent. Even now, locked in a police car facing federal charges, she didn't seem to grasp the enormity, the sheer malice of her actions. The next morning, the U.S. Attorney's Office was already deeply involved, briefed by Genlow and Miller. Mark, after a sleepless, agonizing night spent watching over Chloe in her hospital room, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of an exhausted, troubled sleep, gave his formal, detailed statement. The potential charges against Karen Henderson were piling up: federal kidnapping. Even if she pathetically called it a prank, Chloe was unlawfully seized, confined and transported against her will, communicating a hoax terrorist threat, given her knowledge of his FBI counterterrorism work and the nature of her threats, which had triggered a national security level response wire fraud for the extortion attempt, intentional infliction of emotional distress on a massive scale. The fact that Chloe was pregnant, a clearly vulnerable victim under federal statutes, amplified every single charge significantly. The community of Havenwood Estates was in a state of profound shock and collective trauma. The homeowners association, of which Karen had been the self-important president, disbanded almost immediately, its remaining members horrified and ashamed by her actions. People brought food to Tom and Chloe's house, left flowers on their doorstep, offered unwavering support. Their small gestures, a communal attempt to mend the gaping tear Karen had ripped in the fabric of their once peaceful, trusting neighborhood. There was a palpable sense of collective violation. Karen hadn't just targeted Mark and Chloe. She had played on everyone's deepest fears, exploited their trust, and turned their safe haven into the scene of a terrifying psychodrama. The national media picked up the story with predictable alacrity. HOA President's Twisted Prank Sparks, FBI Manhunt. Suburban Nightmare, the control freak who faked a kidnapping. The headlines screamed across news websites and television chyrons. Karen Henderson overnight became a national symbol of entitlement, maliciousness, and narcissistic personality disorder gone terrifyingly wild. Her desperate 11th-hour claims of it being a social experiment or a harmless prank to teach someone a lesson were met with universal derision and contempt. In the weeks that followed, Mark poured all his energy into supporting Chloe and Tom and preparing for the impending arrival of his niece or nephew. Chloe remarkably was resilient, but the trauma lingered a dark shadow in the corners of her mind. She had nightmares vivid and terrifying. She became wary of strangers, jumpy at sudden noises. The innocent joy of her pregnancy, once a source of unadulterated happiness, was now irrevocably tinged with the bitter memory of profound fear and betrayal. Mark felt a lingering icy rage, a cold fury at Karen Henderson, for stealing that innocent joy, for tainting what should have been the happiest time of his sister's life. Karen Henderson's trial was swift, given the mountain of irrefutable evidence. Her defense attorney, a court-appointed public defender, tried valiantly to paint her as a lonely, misguided woman who craved attention, who didn't fully understand the consequences of her actions, a victim of her own delusions. But the evidence of her meticulous planning, the cold cruelty of her taunts, the genuine terror she had deliberately inflicted on Chloe was overwhelming. The photographs of Chloe tied up her tear-streaked, terrified face were powerful and damning. Davies's testimony about the software, the burner phone, and Karen's chilling internet search history was methodical and devastating. Mark's own testimony, delivered in a calm, factual tone that nonetheless conveyed the steely anger of a protective brother and the outrage of a federal officer whose resources were criminally manipulated, was quietly devastating. He detailed the massive law enforcement response, mobilized the fear his family had endured, the potential long-term psychological toll on his pregnant sister. The verdict was guilty on all major counts. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, was scathing in her sentencing. "This was not a prank, Ms. Henderson." She stated, her voice ringing with cold contempt, her eyes fixed on the now sobbing defendant. "This was a calculated, malevolent act of psychological terror, meticulously designed and ruthlessly executed to inflict maximum emotional distress for your own perverse amusement and pathetic sense of aggrandizement. You exploited your position of minor authority in the community. You abused the trust of your neighbors. You mocked the very fabric of civilized society, and you willfully, maliciously endangered the lives of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. You treated a human being, a kind and gentle soul by all accounts, as a mere pawn in your sick, narcissistic game. There are no words to adequately condemn the depths of your selfish cruelty." Karen Henderson was sentenced to a significant federal prison term, far exceeding what her lawyer had hoped for. Her assets, including her meticulously kept house on Elm Street, were subject to forfeiture to help cover even a fraction of the massive costs of the law enforcement response she had single-handedly and maliciously triggered. As she was led away by U.S. Marshals, finally weeping uncontrollably, the full reality of her shattered life and the bleak years ahead apparently sinking in, Mark felt not triumph, but a grim, weary satisfaction. Justice, imperfect as it often was, had in this instance been served. Life in the quiet suburban enclave of Havenwood Estates slowly, painstakingly began to return to a semblance of normality, but it was a new, more somber normal. The community was warier, perhaps less quick to trust, but also paradoxically closer bonded by the shared trauma and the collective effort to support the Sterlings. They organized a neighborhood watch, not out of pervasive fear, but out of a renewed, more vigilant sense of collective responsibility and mutual care. A few months later, the sharp memories of that terrible Tuesday beginning to soften at the edges, Mark stood in a bright, cheerful hospital room, looking down at his newborn niece, a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby girl with a fuzz of dark hair named Hope. Chloe was beaming, exhausted, but radiant, the shadows in her eyes finally receding. Tom stood beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, his eyes, when they met Mark's, filled with a quiet, profound joy that Mark hadn't seen in months. The nursery at home, once a scene of interrupted dreams and encroaching fear, was now fully decorated, filled with soft toys, baby books, and the sweet, comforting scent of baby powder ready to welcome its tiny occupant. As Mark held baby Hope, her tiny, perfectly formed fingers instinctively closing around his, he felt the last vestiges of the cold, consuming rage within him finally begin to thaw, replaced by an overwhelming wave of love and relief. Karen Henderson was a footnote, a dark, cautionary tale of how petty grievances and unchecked narcissism could curdle into monstrous behavior. What mattered was here in this room, in the warmth and resilience of his family, in the incredible enduring strength of his sister, in the innocent, untainted promise of this new life. The world could be a dark and unpredictable place he knew better than most, and ordinary people were sometimes capable of unimaginable cruelty for the pettiest, most incomprehensible of reasons. But there was also love, profound and unyielding. There was resilience, the stubborn human capacity to heal and endure. And there was the enduring, anchoring power of family. And sometimes, he realized, looking at Hope's peaceful face, even in the immediate aftermath of profound ugliness and inexplicable malice, there was hope. He looked at Chloe, a fierce, unwavering protectiveness swelling in his chest. Karen Henderson had wanted him to react, and he had. Not with the panic or professional breakdown she might have craved from her twisted script, but with the full, unyielding force of his training, his intellect, his resources, and most importantly, his deep, abiding love for his sister. And in the end, that combination had been more than enough. The echoes of Karen's manufactured drama would fade over time, but the strength they had found both as a family and as a community would remain a testament to their ability to overcome even the most unexpected and insidious of threats.